The Association of the United States Army is pleased to welcome you to AUSA's Thought Leaders webinar series, a webinar series featuring military leaders and contemporary military authors. Kicking off today's webinar is AUSA's Vice President of Education, Lieutenant General Guy Swan.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Association of the United States Army's Thought Leaders webinar series. Thank you for joining us today for what will be a fascinating webinar, I'm sure. We wish we could all be together here at AUSA, but obviously that's not possible under current conditions. So we've crafted a series of events to bring you senior military leaders, authors, and others speaking on topics of current interest to America's Army, all in a live interactive forum. We're glad you've joined us today, and we appreciate your support as partners in the defense of our great nation. Now, many of you know that March is Women's History Month, so we're very proud to bring you this august group of women authors and fellow soldiers for life to discuss their new books. Joining us today are Diane Carlson Evans, author of Healing Wounds, a Vietnam War combat nurse's 10-year fight to win women a place of honor in Washington, D.C. You'll be hearing a lot more about that here momentarily. Eileen Rivers is the author of Beyond the Call, 3 Women on the Front Lines in Afghanistan. Kayla Williams is the author of Love My Rifle More Than You, Young and Female in the United States Army. And Shannon Huffman Polson is the author of The Grit Factor, Courage, Resilience, and Leadership in the most male-dominated organization in the world. You can tell by the titles of these books that this is going to be a fascinating discussion. And to moderate today's conversation, we are also joined by our good friend and fellow soldier for life, Chief Warrant Officer 5 retired Phyllis Wilson, the president of the Military Women's Memorial, a fascinating commemorative museum located at the entrance of Arlington National Cemetery. Chief Wilson is also a senior fellow here at AUSA and a member of the AUSA Board of Directors. Before we start, for those of you joining us online, please take advantage of having these panelists here to ask questions. You can use the Q&A tab on the right side of your screen to submit a question. After the authors talk to us about their books, we will take as many questions as possible. And if you look on the right side of your screen, you will see a Handouts tab. You can click on the Handouts tab and click to see offers to purchase any of these books. So now let me turn the floor over to our good friend, Chief Wilson, who will tell us a bit more about our guests. Phyllis, over to you.
Well, thank you, General Swan. And in case you didn't notice, I'm a little bit shorter than he is, so I get to stand on my soapbox. So it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today for what promises to be a fascinating discussion. So let's get started. I'm going to introduce each of them. Diane Carlson Evans, a former captain in the Army Nurse Corps who served in the combat zone in Vietnam and is founder of the Vietnam Women's Memorial Foundation. She served as president and CEO for 30 years of the and headquartered mainly in Washington, D.C. So today she advocates for veterans and speaks nationally about the contribution of women during wartime. Evans has received numerous honorary doctorate degrees and prestigious awards from civic and veteran organizations. Eileen Rivers is a USA Today editor and editorial board member. Formerly with the Washington Post, she has been writing and reporting on veteran affairs for more than 15 years and has produced several multimedia online interactives covering the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. A veteran of the U.S. Army, she served in Kuwait following Desert Storm, where she was sent into the former war zone as an Arabic linguist, collecting and translating information from enemy targets. And Rivers lives in Laurel, Maryland. Next, Kayla Williams is the Assistant Secretary for Public and Intergovernmental Affairs for the Department of Veteran Affairs. She was most recently the director of the Military, Veterans, and Society program at the Center for the New American Security. She previously served as the director of the Center for Women Veterans at the VA, where she focused on policies, programs, and legislation affecting women veterans. Ms. Williams was enlisted for 5 years and authored the memoirs, I love the title, Love My Rifle More Than You, Young and Female in the U.S. Army, and also Plenty of Time When We Get Home, Love and Recovery in the Aftermath of War. Kayla has a BA from Bowling Green State University and a master's from American University. Shannon Huffman Polson served as one of the first women to fly Apache helicopters in the United States Army. In addition to her military service, she earned her MBA at the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth and spent 5 years leading and managing in corporate sector at Guidant and Microsoft. She is the founder of the Grit Institute and speaks frequently on topics related to leadership, courage, resilience, and grit. And she and her husband, Peter, live in Washington State and have 2 energetic sons. At this point, Ms. Evans, I will turn the floor over to you.
Well, welcome from Montana. And first, I want to thank the AUSA for giving me this opportunity to share with you my story and what it was like to serve as a combat nurse in Vietnam and come home to an America that was uncaring and anti-veteran, anti-soldier, anti-war. My book, Healing Wounds, it took me 50 years to have the courage to write this story. I wondered if anyone would care, would anyone believe me? And I did not want to relive Vietnam. And I really didn't want to relive either the hardship of everything that went into building the Vietnam Women's Memorial, which I felt passionate about to honor these wonderful women that I had served with during the Vietnam era. So we each just have a few minutes to do an overview of our life. I will try to do it by starting with the day I attended the dedication of the wall in Washington, D.C. It was Veterans Day 1982. I had never spoken about Vietnam to anyone. My husband was off limits in discussing it. I did not want to talk about it. And I thought I had put it behind me until that day I touched the names and looked up at the plates of 1968 and 69 of those soldiers that I had cared for in Vietnam but didn't make it home. Soon thereafter, I heard about the controversy that a significant number of veterans did not like the design of the wall. They didn't like that it was black. They didn't like that it was underground. And they wanted to have a figurative portrayal of men, a sculpture. I decided to attend the dedication, and the talk was all about the men who served in Vietnam. I started thinking about all those women I had served with and thought to myself, if there's going to be a sculpture figuratively portraying men in bronze, larger than life size, on the site of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, then there had to be one honoring women. I strongly believed if the men belonged at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, that's where the women belonged, because we belonged with them in Vietnam, and we belonged with them as we served around the world during the Vietnam era. When I told my husband that I had this idea, he said to me, "Who is going to do that?" And I said, "Well, honey, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to do this, but I have to do something." My memories were starting to just burn inside of me, and I couldn't let go of those memories. So long story short, after making a lot of phone calls to some high places, American Legion, VFW, Vietnam Veterans of America, Disabled American Veterans, Purple Heart, trying to rally the veterans, the men and the women, around the concept, the idea, let's add a statue honoring women at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Well, the idea soon flourished, and I now had a cadre of allies, and I started a 501c3 and did all of what you need to do to raise money, IRS and a board of directors and bylaws and all of the above. That story is in my book. But what I really want to highlight today is that my nursing skills and my nursing career and my time in the military, it was that gave me the strength to move and not give up. Never give in, never give up. Maybe that's the Marine Corps motto. I was an Army nurse. But we never gave up on a patient in Vietnam or anywhere stateside. We didn't give in, we didn't give up. There was too much weighing on those life-saving measures to care for our servicemen and women. And I think that's what carried me through the Vietnam Women's Memorial effort. There was enormous backlash, enormous opposition. Women did not deserve a memorial, a statue on the mall. Who were we? What had we done that was worthy? And I quickly discovered that it was territorial. This was men's place. This was their place, and they didn't want women sharing that place with them. But we certainly shared that place when we served in the military and were there for them. Bringing the wall of names would be much higher. It would be much wider. There would be many more names on that wall if it wasn't for the nurses, male and female, and of course the medics and the doctors and all the paraprofessionals, the respiratory therapists. You name the numbers of people who served to save lives. But the images of war have been those of men. What I realized I needed to do was change that imagery so that people could see women in a sculpture and have a tangible image that the women were there. And if we have only tangible and visible images of men, then women are invisible, or they were never there anyway, or that they didn't count, they didn't matter. Well, we mattered, and we know we mattered. But urging the women to share their stories about their time during the Vietnam War was extraordinarily difficult, because when we came back from Vietnam, the country didn't want to listen to our stories. The country was angry at us, like it was our fault, like we lost the war. We were blamed for losing the war. We were scapegoats for the anti-war protests. They wanted the war to end. Well, so did we. But we didn't give up on our mission. We answered the call. We followed our orders. We did what good soldiers do. And then we were maligned for it. So I'm going to now turn it over to my other sister veterans, whom I am so proud of, the younger generation of women veterans, because, you stood on our shoulders. We opened doors for you. Just like those World War II, World War I, World War II, those Korean veterans, those women opened doors for us. And we knew that, and we valued them, and we appreciated them. And that's why we love the Women's Memorial at the entrance to Arlington Cemetery, because that memorial honors those women who have served past, present, and future. So now we have two wonderful memorials in the nation's capital. One is a statue, and one is more of a museum, a building that houses a theater, and so on. So I'm looking forward to hearing to the other women authors. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Well, Diane, what can I say? You make me very proud to be a registered nurse. Maybe it was because I saw women like you when I was a child on television doing what you did in Vietnam. So this does choke me up, and I don't apologize for it. Thank you, Ms. Evans, so much. And Ms. Rivers, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm choked up too, and I would say that we certainly shouldn't apologize for it all. I am so honored, and let me start by saying thank you for including me in this group. I know that I'm going to learn a tremendous amount today, and just hearing from Diane just now, I learned so much. And so it's certainly an honor to be included among women who have done such a tremendous amount of service. I want to start by talking a little bit about my own service, and then talking about how that led me to want to write this book, Beyond the Call. I was an Arabic linguist, as was mentioned before in my introduction. In the Army, I served only for 4 years, and I was in Kuwait. I was also a Spanish linguist, so I served in Central America and South America. I was in Ecuador and Honduras for short periods of time. But beyond that, I always wanted to be a journalist. That's something I thought about being since I was a kid, and I actually created a fake newspaper with a circulation of 2 when I was a kid, my parents. And so even when I was in the Army, the idea that I wanted to go back to journalism was always in my mind. And so when I left, that's exactly what I did. But as I was working, I started out at a small newspaper in Augusta, Georgia, right outside of Fort Gordon, where I was stationed, and then moved up to the Washington Post, and now I'm at USA Today. As I was, covering issues related to the military, I was noticing that a lot of the coverage in the mainstream media was so unsatisfying to me. I was not seeing what, in my view, was a realistic portrayal of what people in the military do every day, the hard work, the sacrifice, especially when it comes to serving overseas and when it comes to serving in war. And so I decided to do something about that. As Vietnam was known as the war where it was on America's television and in America's living rooms for the first time, it seemed to me that there was something that we weren't capturing in mainstream media, which was the idea that soldiers and airmen and everyone else who was serving could kind of document themselves. Everybody's got a cell phone. Everybody can be their own documentarian. And so I decided to reach out to people. USA Today, part of the Gannett network of papers, were now sort of even bigger, part of Gatehouse. But at the time when I started this project, to get documentation from people actually serving on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan, we were part of the Military Times papers. And so I put out a call to action in all those papers. And I said, if you're on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan, I want to see your photos. I want to see your videos. I want to see what you are capturing as the most important parts of those wars in your mind. And after we put out that call, I got flooded with photos that I then put together a photo gallery on USA Today's website. I reached out to people who were on the ground and said, tell me about this photo. Why is it important to you? And I came across a photo of a woman. And I was a little bit surprised, although I shouldn't have been, because I know that women serve. Women are on the front lines and have been for a long time, even though for such a long time the military didn't acknowledge that fact. I knew they were out there, but it was the only photo of a woman I'd seen. So I called her immediately and I wanted to know the backstory. And she told me about something called female engagement teams. Now, as a woman who served, I kind of was ashamed of the fact that I had never heard of them. And so I said, tell me about these teams. What are they? What do you guys do? And that was the first time I was introduced to this idea of women serving in critical roles that men couldn't fill. And that's exactly what that team did. There is an appropriate cultural approach in a lot of Middle Eastern countries that are Muslim nations. And we realized, trying to frisk women in Iraq and Afghanistan, that wasn't going to work. And so what female engagement teams did is they collected a lot of intelligence and men couldn't. That was the initial driving force behind them. But they ended up doing so much more than that. They ended up getting into combat sites and frontline mission sites and roles and skirmishes that perhaps initially wasn't expected. And so when I made that phone call after I saw that photo, that was the big inspiration for me to write this book. I thought, man, I'm a woman who has served. I have never heard of these teams before. If I haven't, then I'm sure that there's a lot of other people who also haven't and who don't know the amazing critical work and sacrifices that these women are making. And so I started calling up women who served. I started trying to find 3 women who could tell their stories really well. And I found Sheena Adams, Joanna Hipp, and Maria Rodriguez. Those are the 3 women, 1 Marine, 2 Army officers that I kind of centered this book around and centered these stories around. And I also, the more I started digging, began to realize that there was a camaraderie and a kinship that was happening between American military women and Afghan women. They were in many ways fighting the same battles. The female engagement teams were the last team of women to really do combat missions without the military fully acknowledging that women were doing combat missions. And so they were fighting a lot for equality in many of the same ways that Afghan women were. And so I found that there was a strong bond of understanding and kinship between Afghan women and female engagement teams. And so I added a 4th woman to the book. I call her Jamila. She was a feminist, an Afghan feminist, which might sound kind of counterintuitive, but there are women in Afghanistan who are fighting for rights every day. And she worked with Joanna Hipp. In the book, she's called Joanna Snow, but she's since gotten married, so her name's now Hipp. And Joanna said, I was basically her second in command. Whatever she needed me to do, that's what I did. And so they had what were called shuras. These were meetings, usually all women. There may have been a doctor there that was a male helping, perhaps an Afghan doctor, but all women mainly. And Joanna said, she was a female engagement team leader, that when we had these shuras, the mission was kind of triple-fold. We wanted to provide medical services for women in Afghanistan. We wanted to collect intelligence. And then since she was working with Jamila, who was this very inspiring feminist, they also wanted to register women to vote. And since they had multiple missions where they did that.
Yeah, Eileen?
I know I'm probably going over time, right?
Just a bit, but fascinating. And of course, everybody, I'm watching the people's notes that are coming up, and they're posting all kinds of comments and support about you. So Eileen, thank you so very much, but we're going to move on next. We'll give you a chance to talk a bit more during our Q&A portion. So thank you very much. And next up is Ms. Kayla Williams.
Hi, thank you so much for this opportunity. Listening to my fellow women veterans talk has been just really moving. When I came home from Iraq in 2004, groups of us would go out to the bar to celebrate coming home alive. And often the bouncer would call back, hey, why don't you buy these guys a beer? They just got back from Iraq. And folks would take it literally and buy the guys a round of beers. And it occurred to me and the other women in the room very quickly that there was no assumption that we would also be combat veterans, even though we showed the same IDs walking in the door. And that sense of invisibility, of not being recognized for what I had experienced, really, I think, complicated my own transition home from a combat zone. And it occurred to me that the only women who I was seeing, military women who I was seeing in the media, that first year or so that I was back, were Jessica Lynch and Lindy England, who were not allowed to be full people in the media. They were really just kind of yanked out and caricatured. And I jumped at the opportunity when it arose to write about my experiences as a woman who was a soldier, what it was like for me to invade Iraq in 2003 as an Arabic linguist, actually, like Eileen, small world, and experience both sexual harassment from my fellow soldiers and the opportunity to connect with the local people in a way that many of the men that I served alongside, even who shared my language skills, couldn't necessarily do. And then what it was like to come home. And I certainly never wanted to act as if I was speaking for all women, but wanted to share this more nuanced and detailed account of what it was like to serve in the military, because I didn't feel like I had seen those stories before or heard those stories before. Diane's book came out, I think, last year. I had not grown up hearing stories, intimate, detailed accounts from other women who had served before or during my own service, and I wanted to open that window. One of the things that's been most powerful and exciting for me since my first book came out in 2005 has been to watch the growing number of women's voices being published and adding to that accounting of our experiences, because I think it's so incredibly important. And I've been thrilled that more of them have been women of color, women who have both been officers and enlisted, women who have been in all branches of service, women like Eileen and Anuradha Bhagwati and Miyoko Hikiji and so many others. And that really is something that I think is adding to the richness of the dialogue that's out there. My own service, I went to war during the era of you go to war with the army you have, and when the combat exclusion policy was still in place. So I was going out on combat foot patrols with the infantry in Baghdad to translate between them and the local people with no plates for my flak vest. That was certainly an interesting experience, and one that I hope has been resolved. Now we have a situation where the military is working on developing plates that are better fitted to women's form, continuing to try to address some of the challenges in equipment that can fit a broader array of bodies. We've also seen tremendous progress in removing the final barriers on women's full participation in the military, which is absolutely fantastic to be in a position where now folks can serve in whatever position they are most qualified for without artificial barriers that are based purely on gender. And now I'm just really proud to have joined the VA. Should make the official disclaimer that I'm speaking here in my personal capacity and not representing the government. Should have started with that, but the standard that I'm sure many of you are used to from hearing other leaders in the military and other government agencies, I'm really happy to be able to continue the advocacy that I've done for many years on the outside on behalf of military and veteran women, military families, and wounded warriors, to be able to also bring that inside and ensure that we are considering the full array of those who have served in all that we do within the department. My second book, which I know we're not here to talk about, but is about that dual experience of being a caregiver to a combat wounded spouse. And I think that element that among married military women, about half of us are in dual military marriages, is really important. It's a nuance to our experience where we can be service members and also caring for our children, aging parents, and our own loved ones who may be serving and may be wounded. And I'm happy to join this discussion today, and thanks so much for including me.
Thanks, Kayla. And I'm living exactly what you just spoke about. So I completely can empathize with that. So thanks so much, Kayla. And next we have Shannon. Please take it away.
Thanks so much, Chief, and thanks so much to my fellow sister veterans. It's truly an honor to be with you for this AUSA seminar. The first day that I walked out on the tarmac toward the Apache helicopter, the helicopter that I was going to fly, was a winter day in Alabama. I had my flight jacket on and zipped all the way up against the cold, but the chills that I had that were going up and down my spine had very little to do with the temperature. As I walked out on the tarmac, on that winter morning, I saw that Apache crouching there, looking like an enormous praying mantis, 58 feet long. It's 18 feet across, it's 12 feet high, powered by two 1,850 horsepower jet engines. Under its belly is slung the 30-millimeter high explosive cannon, and on its wings hangs any combination of the 2.75-inch floating fin aerial rocket and the anti-tank Hellfire missile. I walked out on the tarmac that morning, and I thought, who am I to fly this thing? This is the most technologically advanced helicopter in the world. And right there on the tarmac in that moment, I had to make a decision. I had to decide to be better than any of the doubts that I was feeling or any of the doubts that had been expressed around me back in the early 1990s about why women think they need to fly this thing anyway. Right there in the tarmac, in that moment, I had to decide to take control of my own narrative. So I put one foot up onto the wheel, the other foot up onto the forward avionics bay. I opened that all-glass cockpit that opens up and out like a Lamborghini, though the Apache's a lot cooler than a Lamborghini ever could be. And I climbed in, and began the run-up procedure I would know so well that I would know it by heart, but I'd always use the checklist. And then we taxied out towards takeoff. Now, in a live audience, I like to ask people which way you take off in the Apache. Of course, up is the ultimate end state, but in the Apache, like in any other aircraft, you turn the nose to face the wind. And when you use it the right way, that resistance will help you to rise. Well, that really is the genesis of what became The Grit Factor, published last year by Harvard Business Review Press. Not a memoir like some of the other stories that you're hearing about today, not a biography or an autobiography or a history book, but really a leadership book based on the stories so generously shared by incredible leaders in the vanguards of their fields. At the request of a young lieutenant who had asked me to mentor her, and I realized suddenly, gosh, it had been a while since I'd served in uniform, as one of the first women to fly the Apache, I went out to talk to other leaders in the vanguards of their fields, general officers across the services, aviators across the services, and from World War II to the present, a combat rescue swimmer from the Coast Guard, one of the first women Navy submariners, one of the first women Army Rangers, and many, many more. And all of them were so generous with their stories and their lessons learned. So once I'd collected those stories, I synthesized those to do the research into what really you need as a young leader to succeed, or as a leader approaching transition or approaching change and challenge. This is a leadership book for women and for men, but it's interviewing women leaders, not only in the vanguard of their fields, but these are leaders who have excelled in every way, in every capacity, really facing what we like to call now a double crucible. Not only the challenges of what the military presented them, often in combat situations, but also the challenge of the day-to-day resistance that many of them faced. Sometimes outright opposition, sometimes more subtle resistance, but always facing that double crucible. These are leadership lessons and stories that every woman and man can learn from, whether in or out of uniform, because these are people who have really faced the biggest challenges. It's an incredible honor to bring it out into the world, because not just was it my own story of being one of the first women flying the Apache helicopter and that series of integrations in the early 1990s, but truly because it harnesses the power of dozens and dozens of stories of people so generous with sharing what their experiences really were, synthesizing those learnings, supporting it with the research, and then adding the tactical takeaways as well. So truly an honor to bring the Grit Factor today to this AUSA conversation and webinar. And thank you so much, Chief. I'll stand by for your questions.
Thank you so much, Shannon. And will all the panelists please join us back now for the Q&A? And I have to tell you, about a month ago when I was asked to moderate this panel, AUSA generously sent me a copy of each of your books. And while they're fascinating and riveting, at 3 o'clock in the morning while I'm still up reading them, I have fallen asleep with each of you at least one night. They're amazing stories of empowerment. And Shannon, to your point of if you're in transition or whatever, I have the best job of my life. I'll never have another job but being the president of the Military Women's Memorial Foundation. But your book, ideally, and all of your books, by applying some of the stories and the takeaways, I hope will make me a better person and a better leader within my organization, even though I have no intention of making any significant changes. So one of the questions that the audience has posited up here, and this goes out to all four of you, today there was a story in the news about military retention problem caused by sexual harassment. Do any of you think there's a solution to this problem? And if so, what is it? We'll start with Diane.
Oh, my goodness. I think about Vietnam, and I think about how, when I served in the military, women were less than 1% of the entire military force. Today, what is it? Up to almost 20%. So, and in Vietnam, for those who served in country, I don't know what the percentage was, but total, about 7,500 nurses served in Vietnam, and then other women who were in the Women's Army Corps and the Air Force and so on, and Navy. There were rapes and there was sexual harassment, and there was all of the above, as it was in World War II, when I've spoken to my aunt who served in World War II and went on to get her doctorate degree with the GI Bill, and we talked about it. And how do we solve this problem? The culture of the military is so male, and the testosterone is high. We have the draft, of course, brought tens of thousands of very young men from all over the United States. I have to say the majority of them were outstanding. I worked with these medics and the doctors, and the majority of them were wonderful, good people. And then there's that minority. There are those predators that scared the hell out of me. I was sexually assaulted in Vietnam. I fought him off. The women who were raped and got pregnant at the time, this is hard for you to believe, but when I was in Vietnam, abortion in a United States military hospital in Vietnam was legal. Women could have an abortion in the hospital, or they went to Japan. So how do we, this has been going on forever in our United States military. How do we change that culture among the men? We're losing a lot of women in my era left the military because it was just, they didn't feel safe. And I look at women today in the military and how strong they are and how brave they are. And they have better educations than we did. They've been to West Point. They've been to the Air Force Academy. My God, they've been to the Naval Academy. Those opportunities were not available to us. I couldn't even have ROTC. I didn't have any in military indoctrination or training or opportunities to serve with men. In an educational opportunity. I went to nursing school, and at my time, that was mostly women. So I leave it up to the next generations. I want to hear from you as to how does this end? When does this stop?
Wow. Anybody need to jump in on this one?
Well, I'll jump in. This is Eileen. I reintroduced myself.
Eileen, can you get a little closer to your phone, please?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Is this better? Can you hear me better now?
A little.
Okay. All right. I'll try to speak really loudly. But I want to reiterate a couple of things that Diane just said. One, I really want to reiterate the fact that the majority of men in the military are not predatory. And this is one of the things that I kind of meant when I said that a lot of the coverage when I first got in media felt so slanted, because it's like either we hear something incredibly negative associated with women in the military, which is sexual assault or sexual harassment, and it's happening and it needs to be dealt with. It's a very valid thing to write about, but we don't hear about the female heroes as much, which is another reason why I'm so proud to be on this channel and so proud to be speaking with these women, because I consider every woman I'm speaking with today a hero in the military. But the other thing I want to reiterate is that I think an important part of changing the culture is getting more women in these higher ranking fields in combat, in combat units. The only way we're going to change the culture is to introduce people into the culture who aren't normally there, who can A, educate, and B, make decisions differently about how these things are investigated.
No, I absolutely agree with you, Eileen. I want to move on quickly. Does Kayla or Shannon have something you'd like? Kayla, unmuted. Go ahead.
Sure, I'll jump in quickly to say one of the things I think is most important is to look at how in the military, other types of crimes occur at a minuscule fraction of what they do in civilian society. A few people say abuse drugs and they are quickly booted out. But the rates of sexual harassment and assault seem to be roughly similar. And that to me shows that there is more that military leadership could be doing to show that they are deeply committed to rooting out this problem. I'm cautiously optimistic that the new focus in DoD leadership will lead to a change. But the most important thing, I believe, is for leaders at all levels to recognize that this is not a societal problem that they can just ignore and tolerate, that they must own that as military leaders, they have the ability to set a clear standard and set their vision on how it should be responded to and drive the rates down to being as minuscule as they are for other types of crime in the military. Thank you.
Thanks, Kayla. Shannon.
Yeah, I would reiterate both what Eileen and Kayla said. Number one, we have to tell the stories. I don't think that women neither share their stories nor are their stories shared enough within the common lore in a military setting. And that was one of the impetus, the impetus for really writing the Grit Factor is saying, hey, these are leadership stories. All men should be know these and they should share these. So when you share those, you start to change the culture and you start to change the understanding. But at the end of the day, the military does one thing really, really well. And that is if something is important, you hold people accountable. And frankly, I have absolutely no tolerance for any excuse for any kind of sexual harassment or assault of people who are serving our country and are connected to national security. If we are really committed to national security, then military leaders will hold people accountable with a zero tolerance policy, period. There's absolutely no excuse for any other answer besides that.
Slam the desk on that one. I'm with you, Shannon. One of the stories in Shannon's book is a friend of mine that I did not know until I read the story. And this was about a young Army officer, recently divorced, returned back to Germany, and her commanding officer, she had an office call with him, and he pointed to his zipper and said, "There's no padlock on this." And what she did, and I think this was in the 70s, she got up and she went out to the orderly room, for those of us that remember what an orderly room looked like. And she said, "Do you know what he just said? He said there's no padlock on his zipper." And she walked away. And that is empowering. And that's why that woman is in the Grit Factor. This is not a woman's issue. This is a military issue that we all must lift. It's not women are dressed or behaving in a certain way that calls it upon them, because I myself have also had to fight somebody off, Diane, in the military. But I will tell you, as an RN in a hospital, I was more scared for my safety with another medical profession, civilianer, than I was with the military, because I managed to land a knee in the appropriate location and got the heck out of there. But none of this should happen to any of us. And here we are standing here proud and strong. And I think it surprises a lot of our male counterparts. So we're getting short on time. I want to ask a question to all of you again, though. Do you have any advice for women, whether they're veterans or any woman that might be listening, that's interested in writing? What were some of the challenges and the crucibles you went through to create that book? Diane, do you want to start? Because I know you said it took you a long, long time to finally be willing to pour your heart out into it.
Well, it's the fear factor, especially for us Vietnam veterans. If I write the book and share my story, and of course I felt, in working with a co-author, I needed a co-author to help me frame the story, structure it, urge me, coach me, yes, tell it all, and a good memoir has to be an honest memoir, and I was afraid to tell it all. But it's the strength is in the story itself, and that just bare your soul to it and move beyond the fear. And I would think back to Vietnam, and I no longer was fear of rockets and mortars and the incoming, and our hospitals were shelled, and we got over our fear and just did our job. That's what you have to do. Some soldier's life depends on you. And I would ask myself, what is it that I'm so afraid of? That somebody's going to threaten my life again, like they did. I was literally threatened. My life was threatened when I started the Vietnam Women's Memorial. Who did I think I was? And some of the men named their names. They told me, they called, and there's their name on the phone, and I won't say it on screen right now. But just that, moving through my fear and then just being completely, totally honest. I did not want to talk about that sexual assault. I hadn't even told my husband. He read it in the book. And I thought, we as women, and we're all saying this, we have to be totally honest, and then other women can be emboldened and be, like, if she can talk about it, I'll talk about it. If she can write her story, well, maybe I can too. And for 10 years, my job was to defy the stereotype, defy the myths. The myth of a woman in the military, the stereotypes about us that were the only thing out there that people were, the imagery was like a woman, like Hot Lips Houlihan. Well, she's coming out of the tent, zipping up her pants, and her name is Hot Lips. And she's representing the nurses who served during the Korean War. And it just, so to move beyond the myths and the stereotypes, I urged women to share their stories and the power of getting the country behind us to build the Vietnam Women's Memorial financially. We needed $5 million, it ended up, it was $5 million, was in sharing our stories. When we started doing that, guess who came out of the woodwork? The wounded soldiers, the men who had served with us and wrote letters to the editor and sent letters to Congress in support of our legislation. If it wasn't for these women, we wouldn't be alive. They supported us to get that memorial built.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, some of the powers to be and editorial writers for newspapers said that adding a statue of a woman at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial would be like adding Elvis Presley to Mount Rushmore. Or maybe
my
we should,
goodness.
another one in the Indianapolis Star said, well, if the women want a statue, maybe we should put a woman crossing the Delaware with George Washington, or maybe we should paint the Statue of Liberty Dayglow pink. Would that make the women happy? The insults, the sarcasm, the mean-spirited things that a few men, were saying about us was just illogical. And why? They wanted to keep us down. Let's not honor women. They might become generals someday.
Yeah.
Literally.
I am going to move on here. So we're running short on time. But Kayla, what's your advice for a woman that wants to write?
Sure. I'll give a couple of a little more practical tips that might be useful for folks. First is think really hard about why you want to write. If you want to write to process your feelings and maybe trauma you went through, do that and possibly do so with a therapist. And then if you want to publish, think about that and decide really clearly about what you want to make public, because once it's in the public eye, you can't pull it back in. So you may want to process your emotions with writing first, and then think about what you want to publish if you've had traumatic experiences. I'll recommend also that folks reach out to some of the organizations that have writing workshops, and also to publications like the War Horse and the Veterans Writing Project publication ODARC 30 to find venues to start to publish either personal essays, short stories, poems, whatever it may be, but start to get your voice out there and communicate with other writers. That's something that I didn't do early in my career that I do more now and has been incredibly beneficial. So take a look online, browse around, find organizations and publications that are focused on veterans' voices and connect with other authors to hone your craft and get your voice out there. And good luck to all of you.
Yes, exactly. Shannon.
Yeah, I would echo what Kayla said, and think about writing as though you're training for a marathon, and think about all of those things that you do. I think a lot of us think that because we got through high school English or college English that we're ready to sit down and write a book, and it's not as straightforward as that any more than running around the yard makes you ready for the marathon. So you find trainers, you find groups to run with, right? You start to build up little by little. And so think about the writing practice in a similar way. And the most important thing is that you just have to sit down and write. And I think early on, a lot of writers are asking for advice that is like a magic bullet. And the reality is, just like with the marathon, there is no magic bullet. It's about doing the work and finding the support structures and finding the training structures. I would also say, find those workshops, find writing centers where you can take classes and continue to practice and really push yourself to be excellent. But I really like what Kayla said about ask yourself why you're writing what you're writing. There are many forms of writing, and there's not any one that is better than the other. And so if you want to write in your journal, that is absolutely as valid and as important as writing a book. If you want to write a book, think about why and what the audience is and how you're going to craft that, because it's quite a different enterprise altogether. But it's an exciting journey, and I recommend the process in general to anybody.
Well, you all kept me up very late at night as a result. Eileen, I can give you 1 minute. What can you tell us if you would recommend for a woman that wants to write?
Sure. Yeah, well, as somebody who edits writers every day and who writes every day myself as a journalist, I would start off with even more practical advice, just on the basics of writing, which is kind of echoing Kayla. Think about why you want to write it and also focus and have a strong outline. To me, good writing for anything starts with structure. Why am I writing this? What is my intent? What message am I trying to impart? And then that will guide how your outline is structured. And you need a good outline to start a good book. I would also say, on sort of a higher level of advice, be brave enough to sit down and begin. There are always excuses as to why you should procrastinate starting something as seemingly daunting as a book. But in order to be a good writer, you just need to write every day, and you will make mistakes. And the more you practice, the better you will get at not making mistakes or making bigger and better mistakes and learning from those. So be brave enough to begin, have focus, start with a good outline.
Wow, you guys, I got to tell you, I think Soldier for Life is a great moniker for all of you. And you've left me feeling a little bit inspired, or a lot inspired, and a little bit in awe of all of you. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over now to General Swan to close. Thank you all so very much.
Well, thank you, Chief Wilson, for moderating this great event. And ladies, let me thank you on behalf of all of us at AUSA, not just for these great books, but for your own service to our Army. As Phyllis said, truly, truly, you are soldiers for life, and you've made a huge contribution with these books. We could go on for hours, and we're sorry that we don't have the time to get to all the questions, but I would encourage the audience to get out, order these books, and listen to the great stories that these authors have put together for all of us. So thank you again, ladies, on behalf of all of us here at AUSA. Before we close today, I want to inform everybody about some upcoming events here at the Association of the U.S. Army. Our next AUSA Thought Leaders webinar will be on the 8th of April, and that will feature Dr. James Hellis. Dr. Hellis is the director of the Sexual Harassment, Assault Response and Prevention program, the SHARP program in the Army G1. That's Dr. Hellis, and he'll be here on April 8th. Our next AUSA Noon Report will be on 12 April, and that will feature Lieutenant General Scott Dingle, the 45th Surgeon General of the U.S. Army and the Commanding General of the U.S. Army Medical Command. That noon report will be sponsored by our national partner, Fluor Corporation. We thank Fluor for their sponsorship. And then on the 20th of April, we'll host another AUSA Thought Leaders webinar with retired General George Jalwan, the former Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, and he's the author of Watchmen at the Gates, A Soldier's Journey from Berlin to Bosnia. That ought to be fascinating. These are just some of the many thought-provoking speakers that we continue to bring to you here at AUSA. I hope you can join us for some or all of these great presentations. And for more information or to register for any of these events, please visit our website at ausa.org. And finally, we want to thank you for your continued membership in AUSA. Your membership really matters and helps us support the greatest Army in the world. So thank you again for attending today's webinar, and have a great Army Day.